Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening from. You're welcome to the Business of Africa, where we discuss exactly that, the business of Africa. Today with me on the show, we have Lullu Krugel, who is the partner and chief economist for PwC in South Africa. Welcome, Lullu.
Thank you so much, Femi. Lovely to be with you.
Good, welcome. Yeah, so today Lullu is going to be, giving us some insights into the South Africa's budget speech and the budget review. The 2022 budget speech was delivered by the Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, on Wednesday, 23rd of February, going to about a month now. So Lullu, for the sake of non-South African listeners on the show, what exactly is the budget speech, and why is it significant? Why is it important to not just South Africa, but the whole of SADC?
So Femi, it is basically where government makes known their specific plans for the next couple of years. Typically, we have what we also call a mini budget or the medium-term expenditure framework that is announced in October, that also sets out government's spending plans for the next 3 years. So it gives us an insight in terms of where they think the economy will be going, what they are planning to do in terms of taxes for the next year. That is the big one that we often hear in February, any new taxes that are being planned, etc. What has happened to tax collection, so with their income, and then also, what their policy plans are. In South Africa, we have from an economic perspective, everywhere in the world, there's two main streams in which, you can influence the economy from a central perspective. The one is from monetary policy, and that mostly entails, increasing or decreasing government reserves. And in South Africa, that is typically handled by the Reserve Bank, the central bank. And then fiscal policy. And because the monetary policy in South Africa through the Reserve Bank targets inflation, the responsibility for actually growing the economy sits with fiscal policy. And that is what the budget speech gave us insight. What is government's view around fiscal policy and the growth of the economy?
Wow, that's interesting. Thank you for unpacking that for us. That is quite interesting. Now, you mentioned tax. Let's talk about taxes on alcohol and cigarette sector. We all know how difficult it was for those particular sectors during the COVID lockdown. So, one might be expecting a kind of a tax relief, but what is the purpose of the government in increasing the taxes on cigarettes and alcohol in that budget speech?
Yeah, so that unfortunately, no relief, as you've already mentioned. And we've seen that government has continued to increase taxes on those two sectors. So there's a couple of reasons for it. First of all, it's an easy source of revenue. Let's not be mistaken around that. If somebody, for example, smokes or they make use of alcohol, they very often are going to buy it irrespective of the price. So it's an easy and it's a cheap, relatively cheap way because you're collecting the taxes at the sales points. It's an easy way for government and a cheap way to gather revenue. Also, people that are not users of alcohol or tobacco, for argument's sake, will feel that, they're not being negatively impacted by this. This is a decision that they've not made to actually make use of alcohol or tobacco. So they can make the decision actually not to buy those products. And as a result, it is morally more acceptable for people. Generally the view is that so-called sin taxes, as we call it, are often levied in areas where not everybody agrees with the use of those products. So it's morally more acceptable. And then lastly, and an interesting one as well, is that the potential healthcare impacts of something like using tobacco or using alcohol is quite controversial. There's some people that will say to you, but if you are a moderate user of alcohol, that is actually not detrimental to society or to the economy. But the truth of the matter is that if you look at healthcare expenditure, the view is often that people that use alcohol or tobacco are more of a burden on the healthcare sector. If you look at people driving under the influence of alcohol, that is a big problem in South Africa, causing accidents, etc. That is all additional costs to the. And if you don't levy a tax on those products, you're making other people pay for the decision of people to say, well, I'm going to use alcohol and I'm going to use tobacco. So you're making the rest of the economy pay for what we as economists call negative externalities. It's a bit of a euphemism, actually, but those negative impacts and costs to the economy. So that is normally, kind of the reasons that are considered in doing that. Having said that, as you said, it's an industry that has been through quite a bit over the last couple of years, 2 years under COVID. But I think in general, the expectation was that they weren't going to be spared and that we would still see an increase in taxes in those industries.
Wow. Thank you very much. I never quite connected the dots between tax on alcohol and cigarettes to my own personal contribution and to the overall economy. Thanks for sharing about this ripple effect with us. Now, let's expand the conversation to SADC. See, with the current unemployment rate of South Africa, as at last week, it was standing at 34.9%. There is a push to bring this figure down by retaining jobs for South Africans mainly. So what part of this budget should other members of SADC pay attention to, especially as it relates to skills export from their countries into South Africa?
Yeah, we're sitting with a very interesting situation because you mentioned that unfortunately South Africa now has the highest unemployment rate in the whole of the world. But at the same time, if you speak to companies, that they will tell you that we have a big challenge in terms of getting the right people and the right skills that we need. And somebody was also asking me the question the other day, but with a lot of the similar, we managed to grow the economy with 4 or 5% in 2004, 5, 6, that era. And I said, well, that is the problem. We didn't actually move from there. We haven't changed the structure of the economy. So the reality is that we need, as a continent and as South Africa as well, we need an economy with different skills and that is structured in a different way. The typical areas of manufacturing and mining, where we've seen high numbers of people being employed, is under a lot of pressure. So, you're looking at technology, the fourth industrial revolution, etc., coming to the fore. And I think for one of the key things is that South Africa published that critical skills list just before the budget. A government that was unfortunately also a bit delayed. But in that critical skills list, we gave an idea of what kind of people we would consider and government would consider for visas in South Africa. And the grouping actually have expanded from their initial thinking and, the number of the kind of skills that they've included. So I think if you're looking at the rest of Africa and the rest of Africa also considering opportunities in South Africa, that is one of the places that I think is quite important. And then, of course, also what South Africa's contribution could be to SADC, through its taxes, through the growth that we could see in the country. That is quite important as well for the rest of the SADC nations, because it has an impact on their economic well-being as well. We export to a lot of our neighbors. We also import from those neighbors. So the better South Africa is doing, the better the economic circumstances for a lot of our neighbors are as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lullu. I think this also calls for huge collaboration between the SADC government. Thank you very much. We used to talk a lot and review documents on sugar tax when we were colleagues back in South Africa, a lot of sugar tax documents. So after 3 years of no changes, the health promotion levy will be increased to 2.31 cents per gram of sugar. Now, should the consumer be afraid, or is this a positive trend for the health sector?
Yeah, so the reasoning behind introducing a sugar tax was very similar than what with alcohol and with tobacco. To say, well, if you are overweight or obese, the chances are that you are putting more pressure on healthcare expenditure, and that negative externalities, again, somebody needs to pay for that. So one of the ways in which we propose to pay for that is through sugar tax, or what government has proposed. It has had a significant impact on the sugar industry. We can't get away from that. It's been an industry that's been under a lot of pressure. One can ask yourself, however, is it all the sugar tax, or are people becoming more conscious about how much sugar they consume? And I think it's probably a combination of the two. But again, when this was introduced, we were told that, listen, at some point we will see sugar taxes starting to increase, and that is exactly what we've seen. The interesting thing, however, is if we look at the way that money or taxes are collected in South Africa, we are not allowed, or Treasury is not allowed, to ring fence at SARS, South African Revenue Services. They are not allowed to ring fence the income from specific taxes. So we can't say we are getting taxes from sugar, and hence we are going to use that to fight the healthcare impact of obesity and overweight, etc. Or we're getting taxes from tobacco, so we're going to use that for that. Or alcohol, we're going to use that for purposes of making sure that people consume alcohol in a healthy way. We are not allowed to do that. So all of that goes into one pot. And there are quite a bit of criticism from the plastic bag tax, for example. That's another one. From people looking at this and saying, well, what does it help if we collect taxes from sugar or from tobacco or from alcohol or from the use of plastic bags, and we are not able to ring fence that and actually use it to address some of those negative externalities of the impact of plastics or on the environment, etc. So that is an interesting debate. I don't think it is anything that we are going to change anytime soon. The feeling is that, administratively, again, the cost associated with that, to say, okay, we're going to use this for this or that for that, it doesn't make sense to government. And they also feel that they should be able to prioritize and decide where we actually need to spend money. And if you've ring-fenced it, then you're not able to do that.
Wow. Thank you very much, Lulu. Like you rightly said, I think this is a conversation that will go on for quite a long time to come. This is what we'll call the economics of consumerism. Lulu, now, what happens after the budget? To the corporate, how can they bounce back? Many of them are bouncing back from COVID-induced loss vis-a-vis the budget's review. And to the common South African on the street, how can we save more?
Yeah, so we have been keeping track of a lot of sectors in the economy to say, how are they doing if we compare them to the end of 2019, so before COVID. And of course, we weren't in a stellar position there as well. The economy grew by something like 0.2%, so it was virtually no growth. But still, it was, I suppose, the last sense of normality we had before COVID. So most industries have actually bounced back in terms of their output and are doing better than they did pre-COVID. If you think about mining, if you think about telecommunications, transport, most industries are doing better. Two of the industries that I think would come as no surprise where things are still really tough is if you look at restaurants, for example, and then the tourism sector. Those two have not recovered to their pre-COVID levels. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. The economy has, we heard a few days ago, has grown by 4.2% last year. And in all, we are back to the same levels of output that we had before COVID, but there are still industries that are very negative, or that has been very negatively impacted and that have not bounced back. What I suppose the key message from the budget that we were looking for is to say to government, or to hear from government, how are they going to support private sector and actually attract private sector investment, because we've been through quite a few years where private sector investment has actually been on record low levels, and business confidence is at record low levels. And my personal view and our view at PwC is that government simply cannot do all of this alone. They have to rely on private sector and private sector investment. And I would say that maybe that is the one criticism that I have against what came out of the budget, is that that was an opportunity for government to actually say to private sector, we realize that we need to partner with you. If you look at us as consumers, regular people, I suppose one of the big things as well linked to that would have been how do we get private sector to invest in and create jobs on the back of that? That cannot all be in government's hands. Although on the tax side, they did give us some good tax break, as individuals as well. And at least with everything that is going on in the Ukraine, we didn't get the normal increases in taxes on petrol prices as well. So that creates a bit of room individual. So I suppose it was a bit of a mixed bag. If you're an individual, quite a few positives that came out of it, except maybe for job creation. If you're a company, I also don't think they've done anything wrong, because they've actually reduced company taxes as well. But I don't think the message was clear enough to say, this is how we want you, private sector, to get involved and to help create jobs.
Interesting there from Lullu. Thank you very much, Lullu. And I know you're very busy. The final question from here. In your own word, what impact do you see this budget making in SADC? We've seen the ups and the downs, the positives, the negatives in South Africa. What's the impact in SADC finally?
The South African government has made it very clear that they want to address overall debt levels. And they're sticking to that, and they've made good progress. However, what concerns me is the reasonably low growth expectations that they still have for the next 2-3 years. And that, for me, probably, if you look at the rest if you look at SADC and the rest of the continent where we trade quite a bit, I don't think that is something I was hoping for stronger growth and for more belief in programs and policies. Having said that, I think global events at this point in time really dictates a lot of what is happening. And we might have made these plans, and government has made these plans for South Africa and for the South African policy going forward. But to be very honest, I think for the foreseeable future, at least, what is going to happen is going to override a lot of the decisions that we've made in country.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Lullu. It's a pleasure having you today. Thanks for helping us unpackage all this budget speech and the budget review.
And it was an absolute pleasure to have this discussion with you.
Thank you so much. And to listen to this episode and other interesting episodes, make sure to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook at Metrics Africa. Thank you very much for listening. Have a wonderful day.